In the Perspectrum podcast, we discuss controversial topics. Outside of this context, Michael and I are both working professionals. While doing this show, we are not acting as agents or representatives of our respective institutions, and none of the views that we express reflect the outlooks of our employers. So don't come to my office and throw toilet paper at me.
And I don't have an office, but don't come to my cube.
Welcome to the Perspectrum. I'm Nathan Seelove.
And I'm Michael Bloom.
And today we have several fun topics to talk about, and one not so fun topic to talk about because we are, of course, going to start by talking about COVID-19. But after that, we're going to dip into some communication theory to describe the contradictory strategies by Donald Trump and Joe Biden. And then we're going to end today by speculating about what the electoral map will look like during the 2020 election.
Yeah, so this is going to be a bit of a wonky episode. Not wonky as in weird, wonky as in like nerdy, because it's going to be one segment nerding out about communication theory and another segment nerding out about the electoral map. So strap in and we'll dive right into some abstract concepts.
Let's get started with the numbers. So what are the current numbers, Michael?
So at this point, we have worldwide about 16.6 million cases that have occurred in total. That's about 1.8 million new cases, or a 12% increase over last week. We've got 655,000 deaths worldwide, which is 44,000 more than last week, or a 7% increase. And at this point, 10.2 million people worldwide have recovered, or about 61%, which is up from 59% last week. So now at this point, 61% of all COVID cases have recovered, which is, that number going up is the whole goal. That's what we want to move towards.
Yeah.
In the U.S., we've had a total of 4.4 million cases, which is up 450,000 over last week, or an 11% increase. So actually a slightly slower increase than the world overall. With 150,000 deaths, or about 6,000 more than last week, which is a 4% increase week over week. So again, deaths have increased at a slower rate than cases have increased, and slower than worldwide deaths. And then at this point, we've got 2.1 million recovered, which is 48% of cases that have recovered at this point, which is up from last week's 46%. So for the second week in a row, actually, the U.S. has actually moved in a better direction, at least following some really high case numbers at the end of June and beginning of July. Now, we're still behind the rest of the world, but those margins are starting to shrink. So kind of an encouraging sign.
Yeah, no, absolutely. One thing that I do want to address, though, and this is an argument that I have addressed, actually two arguments that I have addressed in the past, but I keep seeing people make this damn argument, so I'm going to talk about it again.
Obviously, they're not listening to the Perspectrum. Crazy.
Yeah. If you're listening, then you should share it with people that are saying these arguments.
Help spread the good word.
Exactly. Show them the error of their ways. So, number one, there does seem to be an underlying assumption that the current rate, the current number of cases is somehow fixed. So you have people who say, oh, well, only this amount of people have died, only this percentage of people in the entire population have gotten it, and only this percentage of people from the entire population have died. And when you are looking at the numbers in terms of what percentage of the entire population of the United States has died thus far, then yeah, it doesn't seem that significant. But there's two important points to make there. Number one, it increases. It is a pandemic. It is a virus. It is spreading, which means that those numbers are not fixed. They can continue to go up. Number two, the number two important argument to make about this is the fact that the point of creating restrictions is to keep those numbers from going up in the first place. So again, if you're going to a burning building and you get a ton of water and you start putting out the fire and the fire's starting to die down and you think, oh, it's starting to die down. Well, I guess I don't need the rest of this water. And then you just pour it all out and throw it all away. That is dumb. Like, that is a logically fallacious approach. That's a logically fallacious way of thinking about it. That is kind of what's happening at this point. People are assuming that because either it hasn't become a raging inferno or because it does seem to be starting to die down, that there was no danger to begin with. But part of the dangers have been alleviated by those precautions, and part of those dangers still exist in the future if we don't take those precautions.
Yeah, and this is a point that seems to be like finally getting through to some parts of our society that have resisted this throughout the pandemic, specifically finally making its way into some like Republican and Trump administration, plans and rhetoric, which
and even Trump himself.
And even Trump himself, yeah, which is heartening, definitely, because, there's a reason why the phrase is better late than never and it's not, just shame on you for being late.
Yeah. Well, don't punish the dog that comes home,
Yeah, exactly.
There is a tweet that Donald Trump sent out on the 20th, June 20th. And I just want to read this tweet because it's a tweet that I'm going to praise, but like there's so much to it that is just laughable, but I'm still going to praise it. So he said, quote, "We are united in our effort to defeat the invisible China virus, and many people say that it is patriotic to wear a face mask when you can't socially distance. There's nobody more patriotic than me, your favorite president."
So many parts of that are so wrong.
Yeah. First off, let's be clear. The fact that he's referring to it as the China virus, that is nothing more than an attempt to deflect from the fact that up till to this point, the Trump administration has had an absolutely abysmal response to the coronavirus outbreak. For a while, they just decided, okay, let's just try to ignore it and maybe it'll go away. And then obviously it didn't go away, and they saw their poll numbers and they realized, oh, we actually have to do something about this. So that's really the only reason why they're talking about it. Number two, I mean, obviously it's always silly when he makes his hyperbolic statements of there's nobody more patriotic than me, your favorite president. It's like, have you seen your approval rating? I mean,
also you are constantly trying to develop conflicts of interest with hostile nations, setting up hotels in Moscow and whatever.
Now, all of that being said, I think that overall his approach in trying to persuade people to wear a mask is absolutely right.
Yes.
I think that this is probably one of the first times I've ever seen him use the word patriotic in a way that was actually productive and not nationalistic. Because again, patriotism is about loving your country and loving the people in your country. And if you love the people in your country, then you would want to make sure that they're protected. So using the rhetoric of, it's not just polite, it's not just responsible to wear a mask, it's patriotic. Yeah. That is the type of language that is going to appeal to his supporters.
Yeah, and he knows his supporters, right? If there's anything that he is in tune with, it tends to be like his voting block. And so, we've been pushing this whole time for him to leverage the influence that he has, leverage the surprising amount of support and followership that he has among, his certain group of people to get them to do the right thing. And even though it's been 4 months since his CDC first recommended that everybody wear masks, and at which point he said, with the masks, it's going to be a really voluntary thing. You can do it. You don't have to do it. I'm choosing not to do it, but some people may want to do it, and that's okay. But now, finally, he's getting to the point where he's saying that it's actually a good thing. He said, quote, "We're asking everybody that when you are not able to socially distance, wear a mask, get a mask. Whether you like a mask or not, they have an impact, they have an effect, and we need everything we can get. I will use it gladly. Anything that potentially can help is a good thing." Like, the difference in those two statements is amazing. And like that last statement almost sounds like the words of a leader trying to help a nation.
Yeah.
It's
so you
pretty
know he
astounding.
didn't write them.
Yeah, exactly. Someone else tweeted those. But yeah, so only 4 months too late, but better late than never.
So all of the same caveats still apply in this situation. You know, the damage that has already been done as a result of inaction has already been done, which that in and of itself should be disqualifying for Trump to become reelected.
Yeah.
There's the caveat that he is definitely still trying to deflect blame from China. There's the caveat that he is definitely been against this from the beginning, and now he's kind of pretending, oh no, I was never against it. You know, it was totally always for wearing a mask. You know, I think I look cool in masks. All of those caveats still exist, but we do want to make sure that we don't punish the dog that comes home. And this is a positive approach. And if he can get more people to wear masks, especially his supporters, good. That's a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah, and just to put some numbers behind that, I mean, maybe it's kind of a chicken and egg thing because this timing is a bit suspicious. Like, he was pretty much not concerned about coronavirus stuff until it started hitting more rural states and more red states. So as cases in those more traditionally Republican states have spiked, and the popularity of Republicans and Republican leadership has declined, it seems like that may be an inciting factor for this change in rhetoric. But whether, whichever way that coin lands, we know that Republicans are starting to take this more seriously than they did before. So a new study from Axios came out, and it found that 45% of Republicans now say that they're wearing masks all the time when they leave the house, which is up from 35% at the end of June. And then 74% of Republicans now say that they're wearing a mask some or all of the time that they're outside the house. So like those two sections. So overall, like, Republicans are starting to take this much more seriously. And overall in our society, 62% of people are saying that they wear a mask all the time when they're outside of the house, up from 53% 2 weeks ago, even while the numbers of Democrats that are doing that is flat. So we know that increase is mostly coming from Republicans who are starting to take this more seriously and take more precautions when they're leaving their house. And, we know that this change in perspective, or change in action, I should say, is because more people are starting to take this seriously. And if it's like a partisan battle that gets people to get like leadership to actually lead the country in a good direction, that's fine, because whatever, I guess, gets you there. A recent Reuters poll found that 27% of respondents to the poll believe that a candidate's plan to help the nation recover from the coronavirus is the most important factor in determining their vote, while 21% prioritized plans to create jobs and boost the economy. So it seems like just a huge portion of the American voting public is starting to indicate that they, one, think the virus is dangerous, two, they want to protect themselves and others from the virus, and three, that's going to influence their voting decisions come November. And
all of that is colossally important. It is an important topic. It's important that we continue to talk about it and that we continue to take it seriously. We flattened the curve for a little bit, and then we got lazy, and it's been shooting back up. And there are lots of countries in the world that were able to get a handle on the coronavirus, and they're starting to reopen more things. And, I'm tired of quarantining.
Yeah,
we're all tired of that. I'm tired of working online. I'm tired of, wearing a mask. I hate wearing a mask. I absolutely hate it. I'm on the autism spectrum. Like, that does not feel good on my face. You know, I am really looking forward to being able to go out in public again and not have to wear a mask and actually like see more than, you know, two people. I'm a huge extrovert.
Yeah.
This has been great for my wife, who's, you know, an introvert. I mean, it's not hasn't been great for her. Like, obviously there's still a lot of struggles, but I think that for me, I really like my energy comes from interacting with people, and that just hasn't been there. So we want this to wrap up, and to the extent that any action that the Trump administration takes is making it at least more viable, then that's a good thing. Now,
Yeah.
there's still a lot to criticize. He is reiterating threats about the reopening of schools, where he's saying that he's going to withhold funding from people that from localities that don't reopen schools. And he also threatens to take that money and basically give it to private schools and religious schools and charter schools and homeschooling.
Yeah, so we are supportive. Like, this is probably the most positive that we've ever been about Trump on this show, because, you know, even though his messaging is still mixed, it's moving in the right direction, and it seems to be having an impact on the behavior of his base to move things in a direction that will make our country better and make us safer and help shut down this disease, which is a good thing. On another note of good news, we actually have some pretty exciting progress on the vaccine front. So at this point, the U.S. government has invested over $3 billion in trying to create a coronavirus vaccine, which is, you know, a hefty sum of money. You know, it's nothing compared to what we spend on, you know, aircraft carriers, but it's definitely a big investment. And there are currently 6 major U.S. pharmaceutical companies that are making progress and receiving these funds in order to create a vaccine. And I just wanted to quickly walk through just 3 companies and what they're doing, who are the furthest along and getting the most money from the U.S. government. And those companies are AstraZeneca, Johnson & Johnson, and Moderna. So AstraZeneca is receiving about $1.2 billion. So, you know, almost half of the total U.S. government funding. And they are partnering with Oxford University, and they're actually going to be moving soon into phase 3, so large-scale human clinical trials in England, and then potentially moving in phase 3 in the U.S. in August. And, you know, phase 3, because you're dealing with tens of thousands of people in these trials, is one of the last phases before getting towards a vaccine that is approved. Now, one potential drawback is that this particular vaccine uses a delivery mechanism. So that's the technique that the actual vaccine uses in order to cause your body to build up an effective immunoresponse to the virus. Now, this particular delivery vehicle mechanism has been studied in clinical trials, but has actually never been approved and put on the market. So, you know, they're moving into phase 3 clinical testing. They're well funded, so potentially a good thing, but still some question marks about the overall vehicle. Johnson & Johnson is actually using the same delivery method, and they've received $456 million so far, and they're also expected to move into phase 3 clinical trials in September, with obviously a slightly different formulation of the vaccine. And then Moderna is expected to move into phase 3 in July with a study of over 30,000 participants. And so they've received about $430 million from the government, and they're actually pioneering a whole new kind of vaccine delivery mechanism that has been tried somewhat in some clinical trials, but again has not ever been approved for use on the open market. So fingers crossed. We've made tremendous progress really fast. We've invested a lot of money. I hope that at least one of these clinical trials, really gets off the ground. If they did, we could potentially see a vaccine in, that really aggressive timeline of like a year and a half or so that we were originally trying to aim for. So pretty exciting stuff on that front.
Yeah. No. One thing that I wanted to say real quick about the whole vaccine thing, I just want to speak to some of our anti-vaxxers in the audience, because I know we probably have several of them.
I don't know.
Hey.
They might have all fled from us by this point.
Hey, y'all. I know that you and I haven't necessarily gotten along in the past. I mean, if you watch my YouTube channel, I've said some things about you, how you scorn the autism community, how you're so intellectually bankrupt that even presenting facts with you just reinforces your own preconceived notions about your correctness. But hey, just this once, just don't. Please, just don't. This has been an entire global pandemic that has shut down the world economy, has created basically a depression in the entire country. And if y'all fuck with herd immunity, I'm going to be pissed. Like, if we're able to get a vaccine that does reinforce herd immunity, and there are still concerns that I've heard from several experts about how coronaviruses do mutate very quickly. So the question as to whether or not a vaccine will be effective permanently is still up in the air. But it at least can create a sense of herd immunity and prevent it from spreading. And if we prevent it from spreading, then we end this. So please, anti-vaxxers, I know that you probably hate me. And to be honest, this message is probably not that persuasive. I've definitely been more persuasive in the past. But I'm begging you. Just this once. Just don't.
So if you are not an anti-vaxxer and you think that, what are these guys talking about? There aren't that many anti-vaxxers and probably no one listens to their show. Well, just a quick fact. 45% of Americans say that vaccines do not cause autism in children, which means that 55% think that it either does cause autism in children or they're not sure.
Yeah. So let me just say, vaccines did not create autistics. However, autistics probably created vaccines.
So now it's time for one of our more lighthearted segments, Tips for Good. So Nathan, why do we do Tips for Good?
Well, Michael, we do Tips for Good because I got a long list of ex-lovers, and they will tell you that I'm insane. But I got a blank space, baby, and I would write your name, but I don't remember it. So I'm going to write a tip instead.
That's a good idea. And ultimately because Taylor Swift and Tips for Good make the world a little bit of a better place.
Yeah, exactly. That too. I that had just come into my mind as soon as I finished saying what I was saying. So now, now I feel kind of silly that I didn't bring that up as a secondary benefit.
Yeah. You look silly. That's for sure. So, what is our tip for good this week?
Well, Michael, our tip for good this week is to text a friend that you deeply admire, but you're not sure that you've ever fully expressed what you admire about them. So this came about because actually after Michael and I finished recording last week, the online progressive community lost a hero, basically. Michael Brooks was a political commentator. He was a co-host of the Majority Report with Sam Cedar, and he also had his own YouTube channel. And he died of sudden medical complications. And it really did send a lot of shockwaves to a lot of progressive commentators and a lot of people on, the progressive web. And I've been seeing a lot of memoriams of him this week that talk about just how much people admired him, not just because he had some really important perspectives and he was really good at framing them, and he was also really good at, just talking to you, but also because, personally they knew him and they thought he was a really just interesting person, a really interesting guy, and they felt like there was a lot that they couldn't tell him anymore. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know him personally. We are definitely not that big. But I definitely did admire his commentary. Mm-hmm. And I admired his humor. And it really did start getting me thinking. I have friends, I have people that I know that I really admire, and anything can happen. And what if they didn't know that? So I actually texted Michael the other day, just letting him know, hey man, I just want to let you know, I really enjoy doing the pod with you. I really admire you. I think that you really do a good job of making people think. Even if people agree with you, you don't let them get away with that. You go the extra mile and make sure that they know why. And I think that it's important that sometimes we take a second, we think about the people in our life, and we think, do they know how we feel? Do they know what we admire about them? So that's the tip. Just reach out to someone and just honor them,
And that's Tips for Good. So for our next segment, we wanted to nerd out a little bit on a rhetorical model of persuasive speech called the elaboration likelihood model. And, because I am just a random Joe Schmo on the street when it comes to something like this, I'm going to toss it over to Nathan, who has a master's degree in this kind of stuff.
Yeah. Thank you, Michael. Thanks for the introduction.
Yeah, no problem.
So one of the things,
edit in some applause there, like, oh, welcome to the stage, Nathan.
So one of the things that we do in the rhetorical field of academia is a thing called rhetorical criticism. Now, rhetorical criticism is not just like, the colloquial sense of criticism, meaning that you're applying negative critiques to something. It's where you take an artifact and you apply a model of analysis to it. So I want to do a little rhetorical criticism / rhetorical analysis of Joe Biden versus Donald Trump. And the model that we're going to use is called the elaboration likelihood model. So I'm going to lay out what the model is, and then we're going to apply it to both of the campaign strategies of Donald Trump and Joe Biden, and then kind of discuss what that means, what it means for the campaign as a whole. So the elaboration likelihood model of persuasion lays out two specific ways of processing information. So it's about the way that your audience processes a persuasive message. And the two primary ways that it lays out are central processing and peripheral processing. So central processing is critically analyzing a message, critically thinking about it, thinking about what you feel about it, why you feel that way, and what you intend to do as a result of it. And there's an advantage and a disadvantage to your audience centrally processing your message, and it largely depends on how persuasive you are. So if you are super persuasive and your audience decides that they agree with you after critically analyzing your message, then they're more likely to take steps to ensure that whatever your persuasive message is, that solutions presented are implemented.
So that's kind of like when you get to the point where you have convinced someone fully, like deeply all the way into their rational mind that you're right, they're probably going to be more persuaded to actually act on those kinds of things, right?
Exactly. So they might They might be more likely to go to rallies or contact congressional representatives or, or even
start a podcast.
Yeah, start a podcast. But on the other side of it, because central processing requires a critical analysis, if they critically analyze your message and determine that they don't agree with you, then they're more likely to actively fight against you. They're more likely to have maybe not necessarily animosity towards you, but definitely passion against what you're arguing. So the best form of persuasion, according to the elaboration likelihood model, is getting your audience to centrally process a message that you have convinced them on. The other side of it is peripheral processing. So, as the name seems to suggest, peripherally processing is when you do listen to a message, you're aware of it, but you're not really thinking that critically about it. Maybe you're not being exposed to all aspects of the message, or maybe they just haven't convinced you that it's a particularly important message. But at the end of the day, whether you agree with it or disagree with it is not as important, because if you agree with it, then you might show peripheral support. It might even influence, like a vote, potentially. It might come to mind, or it might even be a focus on something that is superficial. Mm-hmm. However, they're not going to take a lot of steps in order to demonstrate their agreement.
Yeah.
But on the other side of it, if they disagree with your message, then they're also less likely to take actions against what you're doing. They're less likely to actively fight against you, because to them, what you're saying doesn't feel particularly important one way or the other.
Yeah, and partially, you might wonder, well, shouldn't we all just be walking throughout the world receiving messages via our central processing so that we can critically evaluate everything around us? But that takes a lot of mental energy and focus. Yeah. And the reality is that the human brain makes millions of calculations every moment about things around them all the time. And we're very good at making calculations about particular things. Like you can meet someone and within seconds of knowing them determine whether you like them or not, based on a lot of availability heuristics, which are processed via peripheral processing system. So and so if someone stands up in front of you and moves and speaks in a way and is dressed in a way that lends them credibility, those would be things processed via a peripheral system, right?
Yeah, exactly. Another example that I would give, this is something that I talk about in my class, so I'm used to giving examples. One example that I give, which isn't even necessarily about persuasion, it's more about your approach to it. So I really enjoy action movies. I really enjoy bad action movies. I enjoy watching Sylvester Stallone movies. And I've never seen a Sylvester Stallone movie that was objectively a good movie. But I've also never seen a Sylvester Stallone movie that I was bored while watching. Mm-hmm. So for me, I peripherally process most action movies that I watch because I'm looking at a lot of superficial aspects of it. I'm like, it go boom,
Yeah.
And it's like, that's fun. I'm not critically analyzing it. I'm not thinking, wow, look at this cinematography, or look at Sylvester Stallone's superior acting style. Mm-hmm. I'm definitely not thinking that.
No, no one is thinking that ever.
But I'm still enjoying myself.
Yeah.
I'm not really thinking, and sometimes it is fun to just not think for a second.
Yeah, and while reading about this particular method of analysis of persuasion and really of cognitive processing, what jumped out to me was that point, that it is that kind of the role that exhaustion and overstimulation can play in this, especially as it relates to politics. So, there's a reason why sometimes you're in the mood to watch an action movie, which is fun and enjoyable, and your brain processes it in a very peripheral way. It does not elaborate on it. It doesn't double click or dig deeper or think very deeply about it. And yet other times when you have the mental energy to spend, you want to watch a drama, which takes a lot of engagement, critical analysis, and is processed via a central processing system. So when you're thinking about political communication and strategies of political persuasion, taking into account how exhausted your audience is with your message and messages of politics in general, especially during the time of coronavirus when, we are overstimulated to the nth degree with news about the world around us, that could play a huge part in determining the effectiveness of the communication strategies of Biden and Trump.
Yeah, which brings us to, the application of our communication model into the artifact, which is the campaign strategies of Donald Trump and Joe Biden. So Michael brought up an essential point right there. So one of the things that a lot of people on the left have been thinking during this entire time, during the last 4 years, is I'm tired. I'm tired of constantly thinking about politics, constantly worrying about what's happening in the White House. And that's because almost everybody is centrally processing Donald Trump. Now, what that means is that his supporters are avid supporters. They're vehement supporters. They're excited supporters. And that actually is demonstrated in the polls. There's an Associated Press poll that came out recently that actually showed that the difference in excitement between Trump supporters and Biden supporters was 42% for Trump and 31% for Biden. And that's a huge gap. That is an 11% gap. So people are not really that passionate about voting for Joe Biden, but people that are voting for Donald Trump are super passionate about voting for Donald Trump. And it's because they're centrally processing his message. And if they're centrally processing it and they decide that they agree with him, then that is extremely powerful for his campaign. That is extremely beneficial for his campaign. But the problem with him right now is the fact that most people are centrally processing it and they don't like the conclusions they're coming up with. Like, they're looking at the fact that that over 100,000 people have died so far of COVID. They're looking at the fact that we don't have a UBI right now, and we're heading towards a major issue with foreclosures and evictions because people don't have the money to pay rent. And as soon as rent freezes are lifted, a lot of people are screwed. They're looking at the fact that from the very beginning, he wasn't taking this virus seriously, and that has exacerbated the problem throughout the United States. And even though we did give him a little bit of credit today for shifting his rhetoric, that doesn't change the damage that has been done. And most people are seeing that, and they're vehemently against that. So what that means is that people that are against Donald Trump are really against Donald Trump. So what does that mean for Biden? Well, people are peripherally processing him. And that's kind of been his campaign strategy. I mean...
And note that wouldn't be a winning campaign strategy normally against an incumbent without the kind of craziness that has happened, and probably without the incumbent being Donald Trump, who shoots himself in the foot enough that when you think about what he's doing, you reject it. But traditionally, all of the, awareness that you have of the incumbent allows you to, think about them in a generally positive way or a neutral way, and not have to process new messages. So because you don't have to get to know this candidate at all, you may be cognitively biased towards just favoring them out of just cognitive laziness.
Yeah. Well, again, it's a comparative level of alternatives. I mean, look at Donald Trump.
Yeah, exactly.
You see him constantly imploding on himself. And, there's Biden sitting in his basement. And what I think is kind of funny is when Donald Trump criticizes Joe Biden for just hiding in his basement, it's like, yes, he's doing that. But I mean, I think there should be some recalibration there where you look at it and say, well, yeah, he's hiding in his basement. He's doing nothing. He's not campaigning. He's hardly campaigning. Every now and then he'll come out of his basement to be like, things would be so much better if they weren't so bad.
Which is like, that could be the Biden slogan. I think that's...
Yeah, exactly. Like, that should be the Biden slogan, you know?
Yeah.
Because that's all you need right now.
Yeah.
Because, and the thing is, even with the fact that we're not seeing Biden, he's still kicking your ass, Donald.
Yeah. Yeah, and unless Biden goes and does something that makes people wake up and pay attention to him more critically and cause them to try to, like, you know, have to not just rely on whatever their preconceived notion is of him being a better alternative to Trump and, like, more centrally process any negative things they consider about him, then, you know, this is a pretty smooth sailing path, at least, you know, as far as, like, the ease of implying that Biden is a better alternative to Trump.
Yeah. And oftentimes when Biden does talk, you know, he also kind of puts his foot in his mouth. I mean, recently he was criticized for saying that Donald Trump was the first racist president.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I saw that.
It's like,
what
Woodrow
about
Wilson
the other
called,
44?
And, you know, so did Mr. I Intern Japanese FDR.
Yeah.
So did Trail of Tears Andrew Jackson. And the, what is it, like 14, 15 presidents that have owned slaves?
Yeah. I think it's safe to say it's pretty much everyone except Obama. Sorry, Bill. Sorry, like,
Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter.
Oh, fair enough.
Jimmy Carter.
Yep. But like Law and Order Reagan, I should say Crime and Punishment Reagan.
Like even Lyndon B. Johnson, the guy that signed the Civil Rights Act, he used to be, he was actually pro-segregation when he originally got elected to the Senate.
Yeah.
Like, you know, maybe you could make an argument for Kennedy, but I mean, racism used to be just the default position.
Yeah, exactly.
In the United States. And, you know, it wasn't really until the 60s that it got to the point where, like, a majority of people acknowledged that racism was a bad thing. Mm-hmm. I mean, obviously you still have a lot of racism today, but, you know, at least people consider racism to be a negative thing.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, back in the day, racism was just a fact about the world and a fact about society, and it would be silly for someone to try to ignore it and make social policies that didn't respect it.
Yeah.
You know?
So we did get a little off topic here.
Yes,
but
yeah.
But it is to make the point that he came out and we're centrally processing his message and we're like, okay, that was stupid.
That was
dude.
a bad
like,
one. Yeah,
that was a bad one.
Yeah.
So basically what we're arguing, well, I don't even necessarily think we're arguing for something. Mm-hmm. We're just laying out the fact that his current strategy of have people peripherally process, when people go to the voting booth, just respect the fact that they're not voting for you, they're voting against Donald Trump.
Yes, exactly.
Allow that to be your campaign strategy.
Yeah.
And honestly, you're probably going to win.
Yeah. I mean, think about the thought process, even of a swing voter standing in the booth. What's going to make up their mind when they're about to mark the ballot? It's going to be the thoughts that they have, the emotions that they have, and the images that come to mind when they think about each candidate. And if they think about Trump and they see someone crazy and, you know, like racist and mean, and then they think about Biden and they don't really think of much of anything at all, you have a built-in advantage because they don't like the guy that's ugly and mean and frustrating. Yeah, make it easy, Biden. Make it easy for people to vote against Trump.
And now it's time for one of our favorite segments,
Ass Hat of the Week. So, Nathan, who is our asshat this week?
Well, Michael, our asshat this week is Florida Representative Ted Yoho, which probably comes as a surprise to nobody who's been paying attention this week.
Yeah, seriously. Yeah, he is he was a pretty obvious asshat this week.
Yeah.
So last week, Mr. Yoho was walking with another Republican representative out of Congress from casting a vote as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was walking in, and apparently he had some pretty mean things to say / sexist / total pig things to say to Representative
Ignorant.
Ocasio-Cortez.
Yeah, so first off, a little bit of background. AOC got some criticism for speaking something that is basically just a duh position in the academic community, but apparently some politicians are still dumb enough to not realize it, where she was talking about how a lot of the increase in crime in New York is likely a result of economic straits. We have talked about several times on the podcast how poverty increases crime. Now, again, to be clear, and AOC even clarified this, we're not arguing, and she was not arguing, that this applies in every single situation. And we're also not saying that if you're hungry or impoverished, that gives you an excuse to go murder people or to go, ruin lives or anything like that. However, according to the Bureau of Justice Statistics, people in poor households that are at or below the federal poverty line experience more than double the rate of violent victimization of crime as people in high income households. So it's a verifiable fact that crime increases with economic straits. It's a fact.
And ultimately, you can hold simultaneously the positions that crime is bad and that we want people not to do crime, and generally in society we have to punish people that do crimes, and yet also believe that there are better ways to address crime and solving the fundamental inequalities and desperation in our society is going to do a better job addressing crime than just throwing people into prison. You can believe all of those things at the same time.
Yeah. So anyways, he apparently took issue with this. Mm-hmm. And he accosted AOC. He accosted Ocasio-Cortez by first saying, "Do you really believe people are shooting and killing each other because they're hungry? You're unbelievable. You're disgusting." He said while wagging his finger at her, which is always a weird thing that people do. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't know why people do that. Like,
now, we should say that we don't have recording of this interaction, but so a lot of these comments are according to AOC, but with confirmation from a Hill reporter.
Yeah, there was a Hill reporter nearby that did overhear aspects of this conversation, including one of the most jarring parts of this, where apparently when she came out again after a vote, he called her, quote, "a fucking bitch,"
which is disgusting and astounding. Yeah. And remember, guys, we are supposed to be able to expect more from our representatives than we expect from some drunk idiot in the corner of a gross bar, right? Yeah. Like, that's the kind of language and interaction that you might expect, as horrible as it is, in the worst dregs of our society. And then here it is, standing on the Capitol steps.
Yeah. And interestingly enough, AOC even pointed that out. Mm-hmm. Like, she was addressing, well, first off, Yoho made this non-apology where he denied that he ever called her that. But again, we do have a Hill reporter that was apparently standing nearby that had overheard it. And, it's a reporter. I would say that's a relatively independent party. So I'm very inclined to believe that account of this. So he denied that he said that. He said, "If my statement was misconstrued that way, I apologize that you took it that way.
My
basically.
2-word statement saying only that you are a particular noun.
Yeah. And then he ended it with this weird thing where he said, "I will not apologize for loving my God and my country." And it's like, no one, what? No one's. That's
no one's
not
asking you to do that.
Yeah, no one's asking you to do that. Love your God, love your country. Like that's great.
You're all too scared to post this picture of an American flag.
But he also basically tried to point out the fact that that because he has a wife and a daughter, that means that he's somehow like a better person. He's like, oh, I would never say that because I have a wife and a daughter. And then AOC kind of hit back by basically saying, seriously, you think that makes you a good person? Mm-hmm. Like, and this whole interaction just really does demonstrate what the type of shit that women have to deal with. Like, one of the things that I admired, I watched the speech that she gave kind of in response to this. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that she talked about was it wasn't that jarring to me because I've heard that type of language as, when I was a waitress, when I've had to throw people out for using that type of language, or even just in the street, in the subway. Mm-hmm. But that's the problem. The fact that I'm used to hearing that and it's not jarring.
Yeah.
So, and I think there is definitely an argument to be made that if she were not a she, mm-hmm. then that conversation probably would have gone differently.
Yeah. Yeah. And even if it didn't, we certainly know that there would not be the history of experiences like this in the recipient's life that this is emblematic of, right? Like, I have never been called anything like that. And I just don't have to worry about those experiences in my life as a male. Yeah. And so if someone did call me that, tomorrow or the next day or whatever, I would hear it. It would be surprising. It would be frustrating, but it wouldn't be emblematic of experiences that I have had to deal with and put up with and overcome my whole life.
And also, he's just wrong on the substance. I mean, first off, he's strawmanning her position. She was not saying that she's not trying to justify killing by, because people are hungry. And she specifically said, like, obviously that's not what I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. And again, this is just a well-known, verifiable fact among academics that apparently is not politically correct to say in Washington. So at the end, we've spent a lot of time talking about this, but at the end of the day, congratulations, Ted Yoho, for being our
Ass Hat of the Week.
And now we are going to do something for fun, pretty much. I mean, we're pretty far from the election at this point, and a lot of things can change.
Oh, yeah.
There's often October surprises. There are a lot of ways that the election could go based on different happenings in the next few months. However, we're going to go ahead and say what our predictions are going to be for each of the states in the Electoral College, and we're also planning on sharing our maps on our Facebook for you to take a look at them. And then after the election, we'll re-look at them and see what we were right about and, if we were wrong about anything. So, you ready for this?
Yeah, let's do it.
So the way I'm going to be basing this, the way we're going to be doing this is I'm right now looking at the 270 to win averages of polling data. And right now it's listed in order of least competitive to most competitive. So I'm going to start with, again, this is based purely on polling. I'm going to start with least competitive, and we're just going to get through the states that are obviously going to go one way, that are foregone conclusions, basically. So, unsurprisingly, the least competitive race is West Virginia. That's going to go to Donald Trump. Massachusetts, obviously going to go to Biden. Kentucky is going to go to Trump. New York is going to go to Biden. California is going to go to Biden. Maryland is going to go to Biden. New Jersey is going to go to Biden. Connecticut's going to go to Biden. Washington's going to go to Biden. Oklahoma's going to go to Trump.
Yep.
Colorado. So Colorado is sometimes characterized as more of a swing state. And it is often close, but I mean, obviously based on the polling here, it is considered a little bit less competitive. Biden has a very significant
Lead,
advantage. In fact, it's like on average net 17.
Yeah.
So that's pretty insane.
Yeah. According to The Economist, he has an 85 to 99% chance of winning Colorado.
Yeah. So I think we've taken a second, address that it's been a swing state in the past, but I don't think there's any chance that it's not going to go to Biden. North Dakota, definitely going to Trump.
Yep.
Delaware, obviously going to Biden. Alabama, definitely going to Trump. New Mexico, sometimes, again, this has been characterized as a little bit more competitive in the past. And you could probably characterize it as maybe not safe, but likely. But again, at the end of the day, New Mexico does usually go for the Democrats. And I don't really foresee this going to... I don't foresee it going to Biden. It's going... Or to Trump. It's definitely going to Biden.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Indiana, it broke for Barack Obama in 2008, went back to Mitt Romney in 2012, and it's been a solid Republican stronghold since then. And, Mike Pence is the vice president, which is definitely going to, he's the former governor of Indiana, so that's definitely going to have some impact. I think there's no doubt that it's going to go to Trump.
Yeah.
Kansas, going to Trump.
Yep. Yeah, the whole middle section there, straight north to south.
Yeah. Virginia, again, it's been competitive in the past.
Yeah.
But it's been trending bluer and bluer and bluer. Hillary Clinton did win it, not by a lot, but still a margin, and it's only gotten bluer.
Yeah,
so
and we had
a
huge turnout for primary for the Democrats.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, so Virginia's going to Biden. Maine at large is going to Biden. Although there is definitely, I would say is definitely going to Biden. It might be a little bit more competitive, but at the end of the day, it's going to Biden. I think there is a argument that Maine's 2nd district is likely going to could go for Trump or Biden. I'm going to go ahead and classify it as going to Trump for now.
For safety.
Well, not necessarily for safety, because at the end of the day, I wouldn't be too surprised if it went for Biden, but it's one electoral vote at this point, which I mean could make a difference. But I think that it's probably fair to. I'm going to go ahead and make the prediction that that's going to go to Trump.
Yeah.
Minnesota. So Minnesota was a little bit closer in 2016, but it did ultimately go to Hillary Clinton, and I think that it's probably going to stay in that category. I think I'm not too worried about my prediction and saying it's probably going to break for Biden.
Yeah.
Montana, we might have a potentially competitive Senate race here, but on a presidential level, it's going to Trump. It's just going to go to Trump. Mississippi, closer margin than I've ever seen from Mississippi as far as polling is concerned. And the fact that Trump has 50% to 41% with 9% undecided, according to average polling from Mississippi, does kind of say something about his overall performance, but ultimately it's going to go to Trump.
Yeah.
Tennessee, it's going to Trump. Florida. Let's talk about Florida for a bit.
Yeah.
Because this is one that on my map, I do not have classified yet. And I'm going to go ahead and say I'm really not confident about my prediction with Florida. So the average polling does on 270 to win, shows Biden ahead with 51% and Trump at 43%. And there's some arguments to be made for Biden winning this. So the first argument is the fact that right now, Florida is considered the epicenter of the virus. They've been heavily hit by the virus.
Absolutely.
And they have a Republican governor whose approval rating has been tanking, who's a very pro-Trump Republican, Ron DeSantis. And, if it were 2 weeks ago, I would have said Donald Trump, definitely Donald Trump. And I still think that there is a strong possibility that he can eke out a win. But at the end of the day, I mean, based on what's happening with coronavirus, based on the fact that felons can now, formerly convicted felons there can now vote. So that's another, I think it was like 200,000 people.
Yeah, it's a surprisingly large portion of their potential voter community. And celebrities are actually getting out there to like help pay off court debts for felons so that they are able to vote. And to put the story against DeSantis in to perspective, so in mid-May, his disapproval rating was in like the high 30s, and as of last week, it's now at 58%. So like the impact on approval for Republicans in that area has tanked due to the coronavirus.
So I'm going to go ahead and classify it as a Biden state.
I'm ready to call it.
You're ready to call it?
I'm ready to call it. No problem.
Yeah. Now, this is the one that I'm least confident about. I would like to say, if any prediction that I make today is going to be wrong, I think that one's the most likely to be wrong. But based on where we are right now, ultimately, if you put a gun to my head and say, who's it going to be? I'd say it's probably going to be Biden. Pennsylvania. So Pennsylvania broke for Donald Trump.
Yep.
It was one of the 3 states that really handed him the presidency. 270 to win actually classifies it as lean Democrat. It's not even considered a toss-up state. It's lean Democrat. In fact, if you look at the electoral map, based on the lean Democrat, the likely Democrat, and the safe, Biden already won.
Yeah.
Biden's already won according to that.
Yep.
Now, anything can happen, but I do think that ultimately, based on the way trends have been so far, the fact that I would argue that 2016 was really it was an outlier.
Yeah, a bit of a fluke year.
Yeah. So Pennsylvania is usually a Democratic state, and I think it's going to continue to be a Democratic state. So I would classify Pennsylvania as Joe Biden. What do you think?
I'd say that. I think that makes sense. I freaking hope it makes sense.
Missouri, it's going for Trump.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, I don't have much to say about it. It's it's classified as more competitive because of some polling data that has showed Biden having some gain in it, but ultimately it's going to Trump.
Yeah.
New Hampshire. So New Hampshire's always interesting.
Yeah.
It's usually very close, but even in the year where Hillary Clinton lost, she still won New Hampshire. It wasn't by much, but she still ended up winning it. And then I really think that based on Trump's approval rating in New Hampshire, ultimately I'm pretty confident to go ahead and say that's going to be a Biden state.
No, yeah, I think that makes sense to me. I mean, it's like, to your point, it is, it can kind of go either way. It's a little bit of a toss-up state historically, but also it's only 4 electoral votes. So like somewhat important, but not going to break the camel's back for sure.
Well, not necessarily. I mean, if it does end up being super close, like 3 electoral votes can, electoral votes can be the difference.
Yeah, sure. Definitely. But,
so pick up everything you can.
Yeah, of course.
Michigan. So Michigan also went to Trump in 2016. His approval rating since has tanked in that whole general reason. The Rust Belt as a whole, his approval rating has tanked, and in large part due to a lot of his China trade policies, the tariffs, which has been devastating to farmers in the area. I think that was another fluke, and it's very likely to go back to the Democrats. And I'm pretty. I think it's pretty safe to say that that's a Biden state.
Yeah, yeah. I'd say that for a lot of the Rust Belt type states, the ones that went for Trump in 2016 were kind of making a bet that, knowing that the status quo hadn't been great for them, that maybe this upset New Yorker guy was gonna start, giving them stuff that that would actually benefit them. But I think ultimately he's just showed to be so callous to their interests. I can't imagine that they're even if some of the states go that way, I can't imagine that they're particularly avid supporters of him.
Yeah. Arizona. This is an interesting one.
Mm-hmm.
Arizona. This is an interesting one, but I'm still going to go ahead and say that I'm actually pretty confident about this classification. I think it's going to Biden.
Oh, that's so interesting that you say that. Yeah, I was thinking the same thing, because it's kind of been trending that direction and getting some, rallying from some pretty compelling, moderate Democrats.
It's been trending that direction. The Democrat there, in the Senate, the Democrat who's running the Senate, Kelly, he's doing really well in the polls. He's considered to be a favorite to win. Joe Biden has been doing pretty well in the polls in Arizona, and it's also becoming a more diverse state.
Mm-hmm.
I think that ultimately Arizona has been trending more blue, and I think this is going to be the election that ultimately gives it to the Democrats. I really do. Again,
that would be a pretty exciting win with 11 electoral votes.
That would be a pretty exciting win. And again, I will acknowledge that I do have a bias here. I don't want Trump to win, but that's just what it's looking like at this point, based on the data, based on past trends, based on current trends, and all that.
Mm-hmm.
South Carolina. It's weird that South Carolina is considered a little bit more competitive than Arizona, according to the polling. South Carolina is going to Trump.
Yeah, I'd say that's right.
It's, don't get excited. It's going to Trump. Nevada. I would say again, a state that has been close in the past, but based on the Senate race in 2018, based on overall trends of diversity, it has a very large Latino population, Latinx population. I think it's going to Biden.
Yeah, I'd say that's right. Especially with their ability to, mobilize some of their union workforce and stuff that we saw with the Democratic primary out there. I'd say that, it's been trending in that direction.
Yeah. Wisconsin. This is another interesting one. And this is one that I'm also not completely sure about.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, again, what we were talking about earlier, a lot of the policies in the Rust Belt has gotten people, very, very contemptuous towards Donald Trump. And let's also think about, why did Barack Obama choose Joe Biden as his running mate in 2008? It's because he appealed to white people, the white working class.
Yeah.
And that is a major voting bloc in Wisconsin. Ultimately, I think that, based on his overall appeal and based on the way Trump's policies have been hurting farmers, I would go ahead and classify Wisconsin as likely Democrat.
Mm. Yeah, I think that makes total sense to me. I agree.
Yeah. Utah. It's going to Trump. I mean, What's funny is Utah has a large amount of people that are undecided,
Mm-hmm.
according to the average. Like 15% of people are undecided, and it's Trump up by 44 and Biden with 41%.
Gotcha.
But it's probably just because I would argue that the heavy Mormon population of Utah has kind of historically been showing that they're not huge fans of Trump, but they hate Democrats even more.
Yeah.
So like he might have a low approval rating in Utah, but ultimately they're not going to vote for Biden. They're going to vote for Trump.
Yeah. I mean,
So
if we've made any point again and again on this podcast about Biden, it's that, he's not winning based on turnout, or at least not for him.
Yeah.
So unless people are against Trump, they're probably not for Biden.
yeah, exactly. Georgia. So this is considered a little bit more competitive, and it's been pretty close in the polls. Some have even shown Joe Biden ahead. I'm going to go ahead and classify this as a Trump state.
Really?
Yeah, I don't think Biden has a realistic shot. I mean, Stacey Abrams came close to claiming the governor's mansion, but I think that a combination of voter suppression and just it is still a fairly conservative state is ultimately going to keep it in the Trump category. So I would classify that as a Trump state.
Yeah, I'm less sure about Georgia, partially because of Stacey Abrams and the fact that some of the voter suppression tactics were priced into Stacey Abrams' loss of the governor's mansion there. So, like it's all whether people can get out to vote is definitely up in the air, especially with coronavirus and with like attempts to restrict mail-in voting and things like that. But I'd say their history of kind of messing with the ballot box may mean that that's kind of already priced into their slight trend in the blue direction. So we'll see.
Yeah. So if you were going to classify it, would you classify it as a Trump state or a Biden state?
I'm undecided right now.
You're undecided.
Too close.
All right. So all right, well let's move on to Iowa then.
Yeah, you know better about Iowa than I ever could.
Yeah.
So.
I was going to Trump.
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me.
Like
Even with the Rust Belt kind of theory there?
Even with the Rust Belt theory, Trump has been sinking in the polls. And the person who's running for Senate, is actually doing very well against Joni Ernst, who's the current incumbent Republican. And I actually think there's a strong possibility that Joni Ernst is going to lose her seat, but I still think Trump's going to carry the state.
Gotcha.
I remember when I lived there was a lot of excitement about the governor's race, which the Democrat was winning in almost every single poll, and it was classified that he was likely going to win, and then he ended up losing. I think, based on that, I think ultimately statewide races tend to favor the Republican in Iowa, and I don't have any hope that Biden's going to win it. I mean, it's going to Trump.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, I was like a test tube for so many like questions about our about the like political leanings of our country, and like the representation of the Midwest.
Forgot to classify Nebraska 3. Nebraska 3, I think, is ultimately going to be going to the Democrat, to Joe Biden, but I think that that the rest of Nebraska is going for Donald Trump. Anyways, Alaska, polls are a little bit closer, but it's going to Trump.
Yeah, I think that's right.
I mean, it's been trending blue in some ways, but ultimately it's going to Trump. Arkansas. I don't even know why this is like considered this competitive. Arkansas is going to Trump.
Yeah.
Sorry, but it's yeah. Not much more to say. North Carolina. This is an interesting state.
Yes, very.
I'm going to say it's going to Biden.
Yeah.
Based on the black population, based on how popular he is there based on how unpopular Trump is currently.
Yeah.
Ultimately, and although Barack Obama did not win it in 2012, they did win it in 2008. And there's a lot of data in South Carolina to suggest that it is trending in a more blue direction. So I think I would classify that as a Biden state. What about you?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I think, like, ultimately, if it were just a generic Republican against a generic Democrat, it might be closer. But, like, given who the actual candidates are, I think that makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah. Ohio. As they often say, so goes Ohio, so goes the presidency. But I don't think that's going to be the case this time. Because I'm going to give Ohio to Trump.
You think so? Man,
I do think so.
That'll be a bit of a hit.
Yeah. No, I think Ohio's going to Trump. It has been trending a lot more red. He won it fairly easily in 2016. I wish I had more exciting things and more in-depth analysis about this, but ultimately it's just been trending red, and I really don't think. I think there's a good chance that if Biden wins and is the incumbent, and he's running in the election in 2024, that they can probably win Ohio back, but I don't think he's going to win it this time. I think it's going to go to Trump.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And ultimately, like, the polling had put Trump, like, ahead in Ohio by a couple of points, kind of until, and then opinion didn't, like, seem to shift until, like, deeper into the coronavirus. And so, if he's able to be successful at all in his messaging and, change in rhetoric around the coronavirus, it could totally swing that direction.
Yeah. And finally, we have Texas, which is a very interesting state right now.
Yeah.
They're considered in a dead heat right now. There have been some polls that have shown Biden ahead in Texas, a few that have shown him below Trump. I'm going to go ahead and classify it as a Trump state, though.
Really?
I think it's going to be a Democratic state in 2024. In fact, I'd be willing to bet that it goes blue in 2024. I don't think it's gonna go blue this year, though.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Yeah, to me, I think Democrats are at such a structural disadvantage in Texas, considering just the way that partisan, that, like, voting power is skewed towards geographic space and away from, Democrats being focused in more urban areas. And, like, Texas is just, like, such a extreme example of that. I think, like, ultimately it's a really hard state to overcome. So I think that makes sense.
Yeah. So that is our map. So looking at the final map, my prediction is that Biden will win with 334 electoral votes to Trump's 204 electoral votes. Again, the things that if I'm wrong about anything, I am probably wrong about Florida and North Carolina. I think that there's a good chance that that those are things I'm going to be wrong about. But even if we do give those to Donald Trump, Biden still wins. So ultimately, things are looking very good for Joe Biden. Now, anything can change, and it might be fun to do another one of these closer to the election. But as of right now, this is my prediction. So, what was the state that you weren't sure about? Was that North Carolina?
No, for me it was Georgia.
Okay, Georgia.
Yeah.
So you have a gun to your head, right? And you have to pick one. Who does it go to?
I think, I mean, gun to my head, I think it probably goes to Trump.
Yeah.
I just don't think he's been hit nearly as hard in that area in recent months as some of the other states that have decided to trend the other direction. So
that is our map. We will go ahead and post that on our Facebook along with the episode so you can take a look. That's our prediction. It seems that we're in agreement on pretty much all the states, so we'll see what happens.
Yeah. And now it's time for our last and most lighthearted segment, our highlights. So Nathan, what was your highlight this week?
My highlight this week was the end of it. It was a hell week for me. There was a lot of grading. The informative speeches for my community college students were due, and so that was 40 speeches that I needed to watch and grade, and that was a lot. Along with outline papers, and it was also my last week for my university students, so I had to grade all of their final assignments as well. So it was a lot of stuff to get done, but when it was over, it definitely did feel very fulfilling. So that is my highlight. The end of the week.
Yeah, that's a pretty good one, definitely.
What about you, Michael? What's your highlight?
For me, I mean, I had like a nice weekend. I didn't really get everything done that I was hoping to get done. But yesterday I went for a float in the river, which was really nice. Just like sitting in, it's been so hot. So like getting into the water a little bit was really nice. So, and also went for a bike ride, which was quite refreshing. And the combination of going for like a 30-mile bike ride and then jumping into the water felt awesome.
Nice.
And now, thanks so much for listening to The Perspectrum, and you'll hear from us again next week.